People First podcast. We are talking about people. We are talking about leadership. Today's a big day. I'm enamored with even just the conversation we've had prior to push and record. And Angelina, thanks for your patience in pivoting into this. Rupal, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming into orbit. Humbled, true honor, true pleasure. We have very similar ideologies. We're speaking very similar languages. And truthfully, we're flipping the script on human beings. We're changing leadership. We're talking big deal shit. And those that are ready to hear it, this is going to be mind blowing. And those that aren't, we're here for you when you're ready. So thank you. Thank you for being part of the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. And as you said, we already seem to be aligned on so many things. I mean, the very fact that your podcast is called People First made it a pretty easy yes for me to join you today. So thank you for having me.
So pivot right, you're welcome, and pivot right into that. Like when you hear People First, what comes to mind?
So, I mean, I guess a couple of things, but one, fundamentally, it sort of makes me smirk in a sad way that we have to be talking about putting people first, because that isn't the norm, right? That isn't sort of the standard way that the world operates. And so putting people first is in many ways pushing the envelope and pushing the boundaries of the way things have been done for pretty much, all of sort of commercial human history. So that's one thing that comes to mind. But also it's this, for me, what it really encapsulates is this idea of thoughtfulness, right? What kind of culture do we want to create, and who are the people that are going to help us create that culture? And let's be very intentional and thoughtful about how we're doing it. So it's that combination of, just doing things a little bit different to the norm and being thoughtful about how we're doing it.
So there's so much about you, but I want to break this down because you said another, I want to use this purposefully, a trigger word, a fluffy word that's thrown around a lot. So let's unpack that. The word culture today is sort of the new, I don't know, I can throw it on the wall and see if it sticks. But what does culture actually mean to you?
Oh, yes. So thank you for pulling that out, because yes, I think we've overcomplicated so much by giving things buzzwords and then not ever doing the work to say, well, how does it tangibly apply and what does it look like in real life, in actual practice? So for me, what culture is about the norms and expectations of any context. And it's not your mission statement. It's not your value statement. It is, what is the actual lived experience of the people who encounter your company, whether as employees or as customers, and what is that, what is being rewarded, both, again, very tangibly and maybe more subtly, and also what is being punished. And it's all of that around behaviors and expectations that for me is when culture meets, sort of the rubber meets the road, because it is a lived practice. It's not like, oh, we have a great culture, or we have a high performance culture. Well, what does that mean? What happens when things go wrong? And so for me, it's about the norms, the expectations, and the behaviors.
I love that, right? And that's the biggest thing is, I hear all the time, oh yeah, we have a great culture. Bullshit. What does that even mean? And you just unpacked it super succinctly for me. It's like, what are the expectations? Because, unmet expectations, we know, turn into predetermined resentments. It drives people. And then, from there you're saying, great, so now I know the expectations, right? And here's, this is, I love I have a tug of war with this word punishment, except I understand what you mean by that, because it's such a, people get slapped on the wrist. Well, you should have known better. You're like, okay, shut up, right? But what you're simply suggesting is, here's the expectations and here's the consequences.
Exactly.
Right, of not adhering to those expectations. So, holy smokes, thank you for this, folks. That was I caught something there, and that's tremendously important, because I know a lot of the work I do, and I'm sure a lot of the work that you do is very much based around that, is the word culture. But that is different to every human being, through which the lenses of which they see life, through how reality is occurring to them at that moment in time. And I only know what I only know. I can imagine going around the world, and you've experienced this, so you can enlighten me on this, is that word even demographically must shift from place to place, right?
Sure.
So, thank you for that. Okay, so I see in the background there, CIA to CEO, that is really what, excited the hell out of me. I saw a TED Talk that you've delivered, which blew my mind. Um, High five on that. That
Thank you.
that really resonated, folks. If you haven't yet seen that TED Talk, we're gonna drop that in there because I know that that really not only pulled on my heartstrings, but it kept me glued.
Mm.
So you've really, really succinctly unpacked a lot there. But tell the audience out there, CIA, like right away,
Mhm.
brain is like super cool. Tell me more. How does that journey start? Like, where does it
Yeah.
end? Bring us into your world because you went from
Yeah.
CIA, and now you've brought in. I'm not going to do your story here, but from my understanding, it's like you've taken the nuggets of gold that you've learned here, and you've
Mhm.
sort of found a melding point to say this is
Yep.
reality, this is world, this is business, folks. Shut up and listen because you're going to learn something. So bring us into
Yep.
that story.
Yeah, sure. So it actually harkens back to some of the things that you and I were talking about before we started recording. This idea of just my curiosity about the world. I've always, I think, so I'm American. I was born and raised in New York, but I come from an immigrant family, and so my parents are from India. And growing up in a context in which there were many cultures operating, and there was always this navigating between the two cultures. For me, it also gave me a real appreciation and a curiosity about other cultures because it was my lived experience day to day, but it was also like, wow, the world is a really big place. I had a passport from the age of 6 months, and I traveled overseas with my parents a lot. They exposed us to a lot of the world, and it was not always, I would say, fun or easy, but it was definitely interesting and eye opening. And that really stayed with me. And it just piqued my curiosity. In high school, I loved learning languages. I loved practicing it, not just studying for the test. And so there were a lot of these skills and interests that naturally drew me initially to foreign affairs and politics. So that's, as an undergrad at Columbia, I studied political science, and then I went and got a master's degree in international affairs. And it was when I was studying for my degree in international affairs that the CIA invited me to apply to be an analyst. And it really pulls together so many things in one place that I didn't realize was possible. So, being paid to be an expert on really important issues, learning about other cultures and countries, learning other languages, learning sort of physical skills as well as mental skills. This appealed to so much of my personal interest and also my sense of giving back to society, to my country, to all of the big and small picture. And so yeah, when they invited me to apply, it was a no-brainer to say yes. And the more I learned about what my work would entail and who I would be doing it with, it just made it really, really clear to me that it would be a great place to work.
How do you stumble across this? How does it come into orbit?
They came to me, so it wasn't on in my orbit at all, to be honest. I initially took all of that interest and my experience spending working in different countries over the summer, and I did a State Department internship in Oman, which I was sharing with you earlier, and so I initially thought that I'd be a diplomat. And I was planning on taking the Foreign Service exam and joining the State Department. So it wasn't that the CIA was something that was always on my radar, and I was like, oh yeah, this is sort of my life's goal. I knew I wanted to work in the world of foreign policy and foreign affairs, but then the CIA came to me.
Do you recall what that's like when the CIA comes knocking on your door, metaphorically speaking, and say, "Hey, we want you to be a part of this." Do you remember
Mm.
what that feeling's like?
It was surprising. I think that's the only way I can think of it because, or the only way I can describe it. I wasn't scared. I wasn't like, oh, what's going on here and how did they find me? It was just, again, it was that curiosity of like, oh, well, what is this place about? Because up until that point, like many people, I believed everything that Hollywood and pop culture told us
Sure.
about that place, right? And so I was like, well, there's not going to be room for someone like me. Like, what were they? I didn't even realize until that we were having the conversation that there were analysts at the CIA because my assumption was based on very little information, and it was just that all they had were spies who go overseas and collect secrets
Right. Right.
and
Right.
and convert assets, and that was not anything at all that I was interested in. And so it was surprising curiosity more than anything else.
Okay. So unpack this a little bit. When you talk about analyst analytics succinctly, what are you actually doing to keep it simple?
You are taking the universe of information that you have access to, both classified and unclassified, making sense of it so that decision makers and policymakers can then make better informed decisions. So whether it's about a topic or an issue, like illicit finance or cybercrime, or it's about a regional conflict or a country, you become an expert on that topic, and then you make sense of what's happening related to that topic, given your access to intelligence, reporting and data, make sense of that all for the people who are doing something with that information. So the president was our main sort of customer, and he was, we would say customer at the CIA, and our customers were the president, the cabinet, the secretaries of state and defense, and all of the U.S. The president's cabinet, ambassadors, congresspeople, all of the decision makers who were, interested or had some role to play in that topic or in that area.
Okay, so this is really cool. So just pump the brakes here for a second. I'm gonna pick up topic. I'm gonna say, yeah, I heard you say cyber security. Okay, so if I'm using my own words. If the mission is, okay, folks, we want to learn about cybersecurity, or I don't know, I'm just gonna make stuff up here. There's a cybersecurity breach. What happens next? It's like, okay, so now the team. I think of like Marvel superheroes. The team of Avengers gets assembled. Yeah. Okay, folks. Yeah. Here's the topic. I'm going to use the word mission. Here's the mission. We're learning everything we can learn about cybersecurity breaches. Yeah. Am I on the right pathway? This is sort of how it starts.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's, and I actually talk about the intelligence cycle in my book, and it's very, very closely related to sort of the way you kicked it off. Was there's a question, right? The customer, the president, or I don't know, a general from the Pentagon, or somebody asks us a question: what's happening with this, or tell me more about this breach. And then you go into, okay, well, what is the data set that we have available to us? What is all of our intelligence on this topic? Where are the gaps in that information? What will we do to close those gaps? What more information do we need to collect? Do we need to, find sources who can report back to us on? Then we analyze all that information to the best we can. And what most people also probably don't realize or appreciate, and this is something that ties into sort of the work I do now as a leader, in addition to acknowledging all of our best analysis and what we understand about a certain thing, we are very, very transparent about the limits of what we don't know, and how much we, any gaps, any things that we still don't understand, or any assumptions we've made, or anything like that, that acknowledges both how much we know and how much we don't know, so that we're never claiming to have, 100% accuracy or 100%, because you can never have perfect information. And then you do the analysis, you share the analysis with the customer, and then they do whatever they do with it, right? We can't force their hand. We can only inform them. And then they come back with another question, and that whole process starts over again.
Okay, hang on a second. I'm tremendously curious here, and I'm not intending to lead the journey in a direction, so pump the brakes where we need to, except this is what showed up when you said there's a transparency around what we don't know. Yeah. Like that just resonated so deep in every single vein of my body. And I'm envisioning, like a whiteboard. I just use I love whiteboards. I'm going to say whiteboard of like, shit, I don't know. I don't know this yet. Yes. We don't know this. If this crosses your mind and you don't know the answers, put it on that side. What do we do know? You put it on this side.
Yeah. Right. There is a lot of analytical rigor that goes into it, because of course the stakes are incredibly high. So we don't want to be like, oh yeah, with 100% certainty, this is going to happen, or that's going to happen, or this is what the situation is. Because again, in any context, civilian or otherwise, you will never have an entirely clear, transparent picture. And so because the stakes are so high and decision makers are using our analysis to inform their decisions, we are very upfront about the assumptions we've made, about the gaps in our intelligence, about what we're doing to fill those gaps, the methodologies we've used, that internal conversation and sort of collaborative conversation we had with the broader intelligence community about, okay, well, let's poke holes in this argument. What are you seeing over there? And how can we stress test this analysis to make sure that what we are sharing is the most robust it can possibly be? And then, and only then, do we feel comfortable sharing it with the president or the secretary of state or whoever, but always with that acknowledgement of like, yes, this is where some of the gaps and the assumptions are, because you have to be honest about it.
Yeah, but hang on, you're going into the conversation. So if I'm envisioning my own make-believe world. So thanks for hanging out in it with me.
Yeah.
If I'm going to the president to say, okay, Mr. President, here's the assumptions and the
Mhm.
biases going into the conversation,
Mhm.
right? So here's the filters through which we're seeing life and we're seeing this information, right?
Mhm.
Here's what we don't know. We don't know. Well, I guess
Mhm.
that's not true. We would, if we don't know, we don't know, then we don't know. But if here's,
Yeah.
it's like, here's what we don't yet know,
Yeah.
right? There's different frameworks. So here's the assumptions,
Yeah.
here's what we don't yet know, and here's the gaps to complete it. Now that's transparent visibility
Mhm.
for this customer
Mhm.
to know, all right, so the information I have here is going to be as accurate as it's going to be based on these
Yeah.
parameters.
Correct.
Like holy shit,
And
how does business life change
yeah.
when conversations start
Yes.
like that?
Exactly. And I'm glad you made that connection immediately and instinctively, because that is one of the things that, as you intuited right there, is such a hugely valuable parallel that can be brought into a business context, right? We are always, in every situation, in every industry, in every context, making decisions based on the available data. You're never going to have the total picture. You're never going to have perfect intelligence. You're never going to have everything neatly buttoned up and tied in a bow. You have to take the information you've got available to you now, make your best decision based on that, but always allowing for, hey, if there's new information that comes in, I might need to change the strategy. I might need to tweak the execution of this thing, always leaving room for that potential, because of course that happens, right? If you have imperfect information, at some point you might get more perfect information or more complete information that will help you to then tweak or pivot in a different direction. And of course, the parallels are incredibly relevant in business, because that is what businesses have to do. You can't just blindly pursue this thing in a vacuum. When you execute on a strategy, or you launch a new product, or you do whatever it is that you're doing in your organization, there's always going to be an element of uncertainty, an element of, well, we have to just experiment and see how this goes and learn and pivot on the go. That's what we have to do.
Look, let's be real here. I love what you're talking about, and I want to sort of volley over, in your opinion, and I don't know, I don't want to say percentage wise, but how many of businesses are actually doing what you just talked about versus the opposite?
Yeah.
What do you have? Like, what are your thoughts on that? What do you know? What have you
So
learned?
yeah, I think, like with many things, um, there is so much established culture and best practice, and this is how we do things, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't do that way, that we are coming up against. And I say we as sort of like leaders over, writ large, um, that makes this kind of approach a little bit harder to sell, right? I think there's
Yeah.
still this very old fashioned mentality that it's this like, board and the C suite or whoever is in charge is this like all seeing, all knowing being that's going to define the strategy. Everybody else just has to take orders and execute. And there's not enough room for humility. There's not enough room for evolution or changing some of, or making tweaks even. And there's a real tension, and I'm seeing it now in the consulting work that I do. There's a real tension between that sort of the way business has always been done, and sort of, yeah, business as usual, and this growing acknowledgement that actually the world is a changing, evolving place. Businesses need to be able to not just sort of hair on fire change and chase after every new thing, but take intentional, thoughtful experiments and be willing to pivot a little bit more. Agility is another buzzword that comes up a lot. A lot of the work that I've been doing more recently, especially post the pandemic, is around how do you create agile cultures? How do you create more innovative cultures within these big, long established 100-plus-year-old organizations? So there's a generational tension. There are sort of cultural tensions that come from the younger generation and the older generation. There's just the inertia of business practices. And so I also won't guess how many companies or what percentages are doing it versus
Yeah,
not
of
doing
course.
it. It's rarer than you would hope, but there is a growing acknowledgement that there needs to be more willingness to move away from that old paradigm and be a bit more agile, a bit more nimble, a bit more flexible, while still remaining true to your core, of course, and all of those sort of essentials.
Yeah, and thank you. You said a lot there. there was a mouthful, folks. So take all that in and sort of let it marinate. There's a couple of key nuggets of gold in there, and you used a huge, some big words to me. Humility, number one, right? And I mean, humility. You didn't say it, or maybe you did. Was empathy falls into there, but the other word you did say is evolution, right? So how do we evolve as human beings, and organically we evolve as businesses? It starts with like. I'm not gonna tell you that I think there's a whole boatload of areas to start with. In your opinion, like this is cool, and I believe we are at a time where, and again my biases are construction, which is a lot of the older style. We're still regressed. We're still like, fuck it. We've done it this way for 35 years, and I'm sitting here going, I don't give a shit what you've done. How well is that working for you? Because we come back to a transactional, transient culture which actually exists today. How do we sustain that? But I think that there's some things that you talked about. And those are my bias. I'm not going to go down to that story because it's not about me right now. But what we're talking about is, for those who are curious out there who have been triggered by some of the stuff you've said, when we talk about self-awareness and development, like what can you sort of leave with folks out there to say it starts with self-awareness and here's how we develop it? What shows up for you?
So there are a couple of things, because I think, what is true for us as individuals, of course, is going to also be true for organizations and vice versa, because organizations are just made up of individuals and individuals make up organizations. So anything can be scaled up or scaled down around this topic of sort of self-awareness and agility and innovation. So a couple of things. It goes back to some of the things we were sharing or discussing earlier around that self-awareness of like, well, what are the values that I not only say that I adhere to, but what am I exhibiting with my behaviors, right? For me, it's all about looking at the objective data. It's not about, oh, well, our value statement or my personal mission statement is X, Y, or Z. What does your day-to-day behavior, your choices, where you're investing your time, your resources, your energy, what is that saying that you value? And then if there's an alignment between what you say and what you do, great. But if there's a misalignment, then what can you do to correct that, to get things more in alignment? Either you acknowledge that your values are not actually your values, and then you reframe what it is that you care about, or you change your behavior so that they can realign and move forward. So of course, again, this is true for us as individuals. It's true for companies, right? So many companies are waving the flag of, oh, we're sustainable, we're green, we care about this, that, and the other thing. And then you look at their performance metrics, right? They talk about, oh, we love diversity, and then there's still like 10% of their leadership team is women or non or underrepresented communities. And so fine, you can say you have certain values, but you have to live those values, or you have to be grown-ups about it and say, well, this is what we've been saying, this is what we've been doing. We need to own the fact that actually our values are not what we've been saying, and then just say, well, you know what? We like keeping the status quo. We like being sort of undiverse or unsustainable or whatever, right? I think there's so much performance that comes up in leadership, in how organizations are run, and let's just, I think, everybody sees through when there's that disconnect. So be honest with yourself and be honest within your organization as well. I think we can keep it that simple as a starting place. And then of course, we have to be a bit more sophisticated about, how we evolve it from there, from that initial point of awareness. But I think fundamentally it's about being very crystal clear about the alignment and the misalignment.
I love that. Right. And there it is, folks. It's like, just be real about it. Right.
Yeah.
Be true about it. I don't really care. Like if you're going to say, we're not as, I'm going to use this and not get into all, but you mentioned, we're not as diverse as some other companies. Okay, cool. But let's not pretend like we are. Let's not blow smoke up people's butts and create bullshit. Just say, look, we're not that diverse. Because guess what? There's going to be folks that are going to resonate towards you, and there's going to be folks that don't. Right? Or let's say this, hey, we are a very sustainable business, and here's the actual shit we're actually doing. And it's not smoke and mirrors. I don't care either way. But what happens is now that you've transferred the information to human beings to be autonomous and make their own decisions, you're organically going to get the people who want to be in that space, people who want to be in this space. That's the difference. I love what you're talking about. This is huge.
Yeah, agreed. And it's so simple, right? We overcomplicate it and be like, oh, it has to be this big, like overblown like thing. No, what are you actually doing? What is your behavior saying? What is your organizational sort of statistics, all of that? What picture is it painting? And then be honest about it
Be
because
honest about
everybody
it.
knows,
Yeah.
right? Like everybody knows when you're lying. So let's just stop the farce, stop the performance and move on. And as you said, then it will attract people who are on board with that culture, with that those value systems, and it will repel others. And then it just makes it a lot easier for everybody because there's not like, oh, I'm in the wrong place, or, I don't really belong here, or how did I end up here? It's okay, well, I know what I'm getting into, making an informed choice and moving on.
This is, you know what actually just showed up for me, because I think construction for a moment in time here, right? I think of the sort of battle of red Milwaukee tools versus yellow DeWalt tools, right? I'm getting into an organization that only uses red Milwaukee. I'm a Milwaukee guy, right? I'm not a yellow DeWalt guy, but I know the organization I'm getting into. So I'm not going to go work for a company that promotes and uses DeWalt and then pick up the drill and say this thing's a piece of shit. It's probably not a piece of shit, but except that, I don't agree to it. So why not go to an organization? So now the organization says, look, we're not going to sit here and say we're a mixed bag of yellow, green, blue tools. We only use red. So if this is the stuff you like, then come and join us. And we only use yellow.
Yeah.
So now, like, thank you for sort of unpacking all this. Where does this all come from? Like, I'm curious, and I want to sort of come back to this because I still want to unpack it. When you were part of the CIA organization, is this some of the stuff you learned? Where does this, like, you talk about CIA mindset? Well, tell me all about this.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's hard for me at this point to really look back and think, ooh, was I attracted to the CIA and did I enjoy it so much and get so much from it because I was already predisposed to think analytically, or did, being at the CIA, I mean, I will definitely say being in that place made me refined my analytical and critical thinking and all of those wonderful mental skills. But I think, again, that curiosity has always been a huge part of my life. And fundamentally, what curiosity is about is just exploration and understanding. And so there's a real overlapping of like where the curiosity leads you when you ask questions like, well, why is this the way it is? Why do businesses operate this way? Why are there disconnects between values stated and values lived? All of those questions. And for me, it's about really understanding, analyzing, getting to the fundamentals. And it's almost like that engineering mindset, right? Of like, how does this work? And how can I tweak it to make it work better or more optimally, or, with less friction, or whatever it looks like. It all comes down to that creativity and that willingness to question and not take things for granted, or not assume things always because they've always been this way, they always have to stay that way. So I think that's where it comes from. And then, I've found ways to bring that mindset into, of course, my work at the CIA, but in all of the leadership work that I'm doing now, as we've just been discussing. The good thing is I know I'm not alone, right? You've said many times, oh, I'm a curious guy. I like to understand. We're not alone. And so I think we can also be that sort of beginning of that ink blot that spreads this willingness and ability to be a bit more curious, to be a bit more thoughtful about the whys and the hows and the whats, and then make productive changes or make productive experiments to see what could work better or differently, using the data and the information as one of the tools to help us decide where we're going.
Okay. Hang on. You like that. I think of like a cartoon, like a thought bubble just popped up when you said something like, ooh, like, and there's a couple of words that I really love. Experiments. Like, is there an experiment that comes to mind that maybe you've done, just, I don't know how to frame this. My brain's not even processing. I just love experiments. Like, so what can we leave with folks out there? Like, here's an experiment to try to make you become a little bit more curious. Tell me something.
So to be honest, it's a really easy one, and it's so straightforward. So for yourself as an individual, anytime I say to myself, "Oh, that was interesting," or "Oh, I never thought of it that way," or like you said, just a thought bubble popped out into my mind. I don't just, more often than not, yes, like most people, I will just sort of leave it at that and be like, "Oh, that was interesting." But every so often, right, I let myself indulge in that rabbit hole, indulge in the whys, right? And I think we are all naturally curious people. Like from the day we are brought into this earth, right, where babies are putting things into their mouths and trying to, falling and testing and touching everything. We love to explore the world. And so for many reasons that sort of gets softened and deadened in a lot of us over time, but we all will experience probably at some point every day where it's like, oh, that was interesting, or I never thought about that, or just something seems beautiful or unusual. And then it's up to us to explore that, whether it's a 10-minute Google search or buying a book about this topic and then actually reading it. But we can all indulge that curiosity, because then it feeds more curiosity, right? You follow that trail, you go down that rabbit hole, and then it takes you to somewhere else and another place and another place. And by the next thing you know, you've sort of learned something about a totally different world or a totally different idea that you might not have considered otherwise. And so I think indulge the curiosity, because you do still have it, and it is this beautiful self-reinforcing mechanism. The more curious you are and the more you indulge it, the more curious you'll be, and then the more you indulge, it's really nice how it can feed on itself. And then making it tangibly useful to your day-to-day life or to your organization, right? Because you can do this within a company as well. Take what you've learned and think of ways that you can concretely apply that to your day job or to your work or to a project that you're working on. And I'm going to take a breath in a second, but because you've talked about construction, I've got a juicy sort of
Tell me. Yeah, yeah,
parallel
yeah.
here for construction. So this is about curiosity and then trying to bring it into a different context. So I do not cook. I love food, but I do not cook. But I have family members who are incredibly beautiful, talented cooks. And one of my cousins, who's the best cook I know, she was telling me about how she prepares these meals that are incredible and relatively quick. And she told me about this concept that she uses, which is a French term called mise en place. And the idea here is that before you actually start cooking or doing anything, you take out all the gear, all the utensils, all of the ingredients, you chop everything up, and you lay it out all nicely and neatly in front of you, so that when it comes time to start cooking, you're not running around looking for things. Oh, I don't have enough salt, or I have to go to the grocery store and pick up some basil, or whatever it is. It's all there. You've identified all the gaps, all of the things that you need or that you don't have, and it's all there so that when it comes to execute, you can run with it. So my first business that I am still head of is in real estate construction and development. And the way we've brought mise en place into our real estate business is when we have a big project, we do exactly the same thing. We lay, not physically, but we bring the team together and we say, okay, what paint colors are we going to use? Where are the plug sockets going to go? What size is the master bedroom going to be? What color is the fixtures and the fittings and the carpets? And so literally every single detail is laid out. And then when it comes time to planning the execution, there's not all this wasted time with the project manager or with me or oh, what are we going to use for this? Or what's the spec of that tile? Or where are we going to source this timber from or whatever? You've gone through it all from the very beginning. And that is something we can all do, right? Take the learnings from different disparate fields, curiosity that we've indulged, and find ways to tangibly bring it. Not everything will be able to translate, but many, many things can. And that's just one example.
I mean, that was the best example. Actually, you actually calmed my brain, because when you said, indulge in the curiosity, and I envisioned, that airplane banner flying through the sky. That's sort of the message to the world: is indulge in the curiosity. Fine. But then the pragmatic part of my brain says, well, how do I do that? And you simply unpack that very vividly. So I love that metaphor. And
Yeah.
it's like by laying out the and tell me again, mise en, what's the French
Mise
term?
en place.
Mise en place, right? By laying it out, and I'll never remember that, or not yet anyhow. But I just envisioned that table or the countertop, whatever it is, lay out all the ingredients so that we can identify the gaps and we can indulge in the curiosity. Oh, shit! I didn't think of the finish on that paint, or I didn't think about how we're gonna finish the icing on top of the cake, or right? Because you'll run through that. Oh, let's bake the cake. Okay, pull it out of the oven.
Exactly.
Oh, we need to ice it. Oh, I don't have any vanilla icing. I gotta run to the store and get chocolate. I don't know. I'm not a baker and I don't
Yeah.
really care
No,
for
you're
that
right.
stuff. But that's the whole thing
Yeah.
is what you've
Yeah.
identified is, you know, and you know the other thing that excites me is when you talk about that is that you've got the whole team there,
Hmm.
right? So
Yep.
if you know I'm the baker and you know I have a little a young boy at home, he's 10 years old, and he's the finisher, he's the guy who's going to ice it. Well, don't I want to involve him and say, Christian,
Yeah.
dude, this cake's going to be ready in an hour, how do you want to ice
Yeah.
it?
Yep.
There it is,
And what
folks.
quality, right? How much detail are you
How
going
much
to do it with as
detail?
well? Yeah. It's all of those things, right? And it's true. It's like the practical application is so powerful because then you've got all the people who are contributing to this thing, who have a say in this thing there, and they can say, and again, going back to the sort of the project management example, we've had times where, you know, the architect, the plumbers, the electricians, all of the people are around the table, and the architect will be like, oh, well, we've got to do this really beautiful feature, and everyone's like, yeah. And then the electrician will be like, well, we need a different voltage for that. So we're going to need to then work backwards when we're doing the initial cabling and wiring going into the property. Here's some of the things that we're going to need to think about, right? So again, you can foresee the problems. You can have different insights coming in and saying, okay, well, fine, we can do this thing, we can ice it in this way, but we need to get a different piping bag, or we need to get a different whatever it is, right? And so then when you do go put the cake in the oven or break, you know, take the shovel into the ground, it just takes a lot of the friction and the stress away. Not all of it, of course, right? Things can always go wrong and there will always be unexpected challenges. But from the beginning, you can sort of try to eliminate and cut out as much of that as possible. And it just makes it for a much smoother execution when it comes time for it.
I'm so excited. You know, as you're sharing all this, and I'm tremendously present with you, and like that thought bubble again. The light actually wasn't a thought bubble; it was a light bulb went off in my head here, where we're talking. The conversation started about culture and a definition of culture, and you know we use words like I don't you know we paint the whole picture there, and then this the way you just described all this actually completes the whole circle. Here's how
Mm-hmm.
we create that culture, folks,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what happens now is like here's the design,
Yeah.
and let's talk. I'm going to talk construction. That's my comfort zone right now. Is
Yeah.
here's the design, folks.
Yeah.
Build it. Then the electrician gets, the plumber gets, you know, the bricklayer gets, everybody gets to say, oh, this is a piece of shit. It doesn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus what you're saying is when we have the self awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, to pull everybody together and say, here's what we're talking about. Let's you know invoke the curiosity and bring up the gaps right now. Identify what we
Yep.
don't know. All this shit you talked about earlier
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
is now on the table,
Yeah.
right? Well, now not only is the project going to get executed seamlessly, not seamlessly, but there's going to be a lot less hurdles along the way. We're
Yeah.
also establishing organically a sense
Yeah.
of community and culture. We've got
Yeah.
like-minded individuals trending in the
Exactly.
same direction to say we're going to
Yeah.
build this building and here's how it's
Yep.
going to go. And by the way, now I have a connection with Jonathan and with Joe and with Sally
Yep.
and with Marie. I can pick up the phone
Mm-hmm.
and say, "Hey, it's Sally.
Yes.
You know, when's the plumbing starting? Oh, okay. Let me connect with Josie. Josie, you know, when are you starting the
Yep.
bricks, right?"
Yep.
Versus
Exactly.
the banter and the battles that occurs. Thank you. All I can say is
Yeah.
thank you. And folks, I hope that landed with you. It landed with me in a tremendously unique way. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I'm curious. I came across information somewhere that sort of just made me excited. I saw it, and I'm going to look down and read it. It says technical ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you smile. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So tactical ignorance. So it's something that I have coined to describe this ability to, I guess, kind of alluding back to what we shared earlier, right? To make decisions with imperfect information. But in this instance, we are choosing the inputs that we are letting in and choosing the inputs that we are keeping out. So the reason I put the word tactical in there is because it's that qualifier is really important. It's not about being ignorant. It is not about cherry picking data. It is not about only looking for things that confirm your assumptions. It's saying, what am I trying to achieve here? What information will help me achieve that thing? I will let it in. What information will not help me achieve that thing or will distract me? I'm going to keep it out. So I will give you an intangible example, and then I'll give you a more tangible example. So when I was at the agency, I was sent to, or I volunteered to go to a war zone, and my role was to be the briefer to the four-star general of the commanding general of all of our forces there. And I'm a civilian, early 20s or mid 20s, I guess 26, young woman going into this active battlefield, and I have to brief the most senior person
Hmm.
on his turf in this really volatile, complex context. And I could have, at that age, being an outsider in every way possible, gotten so consumed with, oh, he's so important and I'm so junior and who am I and how do I don't belong here and this is such a big deal. But I didn't do any of that, right? All of those inputs were not relevant. I very consciously and tactically chose to ignore those signals, those thoughts, all of that stuff, because I knew if I went down that rabbit hole, it was going to distract me from doing my job. My job in that moment was to deliver the best, most well-informed, most up-to-date analysis of what me and my everybody back at headquarters thought, sort of our most recent up-to-date information and analysis. So I tactically ignored all the atmospherics, the ranks and the seniority and that being an outsider. And I channeled all of that energy instead on the inputs that I did need. Who do I need to talk to? How do I refine this? How do I present it in a way that's going to be really valuable and helpful? What other information can I bring to bear that's going to help him do his job? And focused instead on letting those inputs in and keeping everything else out. So that's one example of tactical ignorance, but it's also like a bigger picture example of, in business, in many situations in business, we are all bombarded with experts and insights and people who
Mm.
have opinions and all of this stuff. Every single one of us is drowning in noise. And it's, the pinging, the email, the WhatsApps, the Slack groups, the this, that, and the other thing. And again, is that input going to help you with your job? Are the podcasts you're listening to going to help you achieve that thing? Are the books you're reading? Are the people you're talking to? All of the stuff that will help you achieve that goal, that vision, that strategy, that whatever it is that you're there to do, let those in. All of that other stuff, all of the random opinions from the guy down at the bar or your hairdresser or your best friend or your parents or, books that you might have read but, aren't relevant anymore. All of that stuff, you need to do the work to decide, okay, well, that's not relevant. Those are distractions, and start cutting out the noise and start focusing on what is going to help me achieve this thing. And it's being very clear about what you let in and what you keep out. Again, with the big caveat, of course, of not burying your head in the sand, right? But being very intentional and tactical about those inputs.
Okay. Yeah, and I love that word intentional. So may I ask you another question?
Sure.
Um, when you're now, this is what shows up for me is like I got all that right, and we're talking about intentionality, and again, I love that because there's a lot of fluffiness that floats around. Social media talks about being intentional, but you really identified that
Mm-hmm.
um, so beautifully. Now, all of what you've learned throughout your life, when you're faced with a tough decision, is there prompts, questions, things that sort of float into your mind
Mm-hmm.
to help you decide which pathway do I go down?
Yes. There are two things. One, if it's something totally new, or even just a little bit outside of my comfort zone, I will always seek advice from people who are qualified to give it to me. And by qualified, I mean either have an expertise in that area or have done that thing successfully themselves.
Okay.
So qualified. And then also are aligned in my values, right? Because there are so many things to achieve any goal, but I want to make sure that the way I get there is also in alignment with what I'm getting once I get to that place. And so if I take advice from anybody else, are we aligned in values and have they done the thing? Are they qualified to give me this advice? That's one. And then the second thing is being very clear about my own values and help using those to guide my decisions. Or do I go left? Do I go right? Do I stay on on this path? Because that is another thing, again, going back to this idea of like looking back at our lived what our lived experience and choices are saying about our values. I know for me, my fundamental values are about making connections, about solving problems, and having a positive impact, right? I can tell you, my whole life has been different ways of doing those three things. So when I am deciding, well, do I go down this way or do that way? Do I work with this client or that client? Do I, explore this
Mm.
opportunity or that one? Are those three things present, right? Can I make connections? Can I contribute? Can I make a positive impact? And if I am saying, if the answer is yes to those things, then I will do it. And I will explore then what it will take to take those next steps. And then, like I said, solicit the advice and outside expertise, as long as they're qualified and aligned in values. But it's those two things. It really is not more complicated than that
No,
for
except
me.
thank you for that. And it's not more complicated than that. And you've done the hard work yourself. You've done the internal
Yeah.
reflections to say, here's the three pillars for me, right? Am I making connections?
Mm-hmm.
Am I contributing to something bigger? And what else did you say?
Solving problems.
Solving problems, right? If
Yeah.
if those are within that orbit, okay, cool. Well, now the answer is hell yes. I'm going to go into this. What do I do
Mm-hmm.
next? Well, I still don't know what I don't know, so I'm
Yep.
going to lean into the resources to do.
Yeah.
Right? Oh,
Exactly. And
I'm gonna go buy this house. Well, I've never done this before. I better talk to people who do.
exactly.
Right?
And it's also, so it's that getting that advice again from qualified and values aligned people. And also this another element of it is because of course you can take all the advice, but at some point you have to do the doing, right?
Yeah.
And so it goes back to this idea of experimentation. It's not about this wholesale overhaul and like I'm going to transform myself overnight or going to go from owning no houses to trying to buy 10 in the next 6 weeks or whatever. Like we again, because of social media and because of the way things
Right.
are stereotyped around success, people think it has to be huge or it doesn't count, right? We've got to 10x the results and we got to have big, audacious, hairy goals. I am much more comfortable. And for me, I think, and for most people, I imagine it's much more possible to take small steps and experiment with what does or doesn't work. So you're not throwing all of your resources in one direction, finding out too late, oh, well, that didn't work. And now you're left with nothing, right? You can take small experiments, make small experiments, and then expand it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Or if the experiment comes back and you're like, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting, I'm going to maybe pivot and go in this direction. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And it doesn't have to be this big, tremendous before and after shot for it to be meaningful and also for it to take you in the direction that you want to go in.
Yeah. Thank you. You've thrown a lot out at the audience, and I'm sure that there's some folks out there going, "Holy shit, shut up! You guys are you're talking too much for me. You're talking like this is over consuming. My brain cannot process this, and it sounds um, unorthodox and weird and I'm not ready. And I get all that. And this is why we're having this conversation because I want to really pivot into this. I think you really identified that. You did a wonderful TED talk, and I mentioned that before, and I want to acknowledge it again. But something that really showed up, and I see it now through our conversations too, is in the TED talk, something along the lines of embrace the weird, embrace the oddballs.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that, and what did you learn? What do you want people to know when you say that? Embrace the weird.
Yeah. So for me, it's really about, again, challenging the assumptions we make and
Ah,
challenging what we've been fed from a very young age, from school, from again, from pop culture, from everything, right? All of the inputs that we're sort of swimming in. And again, not challenging them for challenge's sake, but questioning
yes,
why
yes,
is this the
yes.
way it's done, right? Why are we doing this instead of this? Why do we have, I don't know, in a political example, why do we have an electoral college system when it clearly is so weird and bizarre? Why don't we have a more direct representative democracy or electoral process? Like, right? So there is nothing, there are many things that we at least should let ourselves question the whys and the hows and the whats and all of that kind of stuff. And the reason I talk about weirdness is because one of the things that we are told, and this also ties into something we were talking earlier about around business and how so much around businesses and business culture and leadership culture is about performing and pretending and to putting on a persona and I fundamentally believe, but also know from every example I've seen, that's total bullshit, right? This idea that we have of CEOs, the good CEOs are really aggressive and they have all the answers and they sort of just bark out orders and, they're confident and they're well spoken and they're, have that certain charisma. No, I am, and I have met hundreds of CEOs who do not fit that persona and yet are incredibly effective leaders. And so I think by embracing the weird, it's about embracing the fact that no single person is ever just one thing is and all of the ideas we have about what a leader looks like, about what a successful entrepreneur looks like, of what a, I don't know, a scientist, an inventor, an innovator, all of that is coming to us not just from our own mind, but we are being given messages, subtle and not so subtle, about what it's supposed to be like. Well, it doesn't have to, or it isn't supposed to be like anything, right? I cannot tell you the number of people who, when they look at my resume and they meet me, are like, that isn't what I was expecting, right? Or people who are like, wow, given what you've done, I expected you to be a bit more standoffish or less personable or whatever it is, right? And it's because these assumptions are that if you have certain attributes or if you've done certain things and you're an asshole or you're sort of think you're better than everyone. Maybe some people are like that, but not everyone, right?
Yeah.
There are very rich people who are incredibly generous, and there are very poor people who are generous. There are successful people who are stingy as hell, and poor people who are stingy as hell. There's the diversity of the human experience is something that we've tried to narrow down into one little descriptive box, and no person is like that. So when I talk about embracing weird, it's about that authenticity of the fact that, yes, I am a mom, I am a CEO, I am an author, I am a nerd, I am also a bit of a badass, I love playing soccer, but I also love reading books. Like, all of these things, right? They don't have to fit. And this idea that we have to fit into a mold, that we have to fit into this archetype, is total nonsense. And the reality is that every individual is weird in some way, is an outlier in some way, because we are all very complex and multifaceted. So let's stop pretending
Mm.
that just because you're a lawyer you have to behave this way and you can't behave another way, right? Or whatever this conversation is. It's about embracing the fact that everybody has more to them than just the superficial and what you can see or what you assume. And let's unpack that. Let's use that in a tangible, valuable, practical way in a workplace context and in every context. And let's just let people be who they are. Again, with the caveat being, as long as they're not assholes and destroying anything, we are complex, multifaceted human beings, and I think it's okay, and it needs to be much more acknowledged and accepted than I think it still is.
I'm just, excuse me, I'm just pausing because that was it, folks. Like, there it is. That was the best. There was so many great parts, but like, listen, I love exactly what you're saying. And if I could reach through the screen and give you a hug, my God, I would give you a hug. So
Right
touching,
back at you.
moving, and inspiring. Like, that's what it is. It all comes back to, indulge in the curiosity and challenge your assumptions. I love that. I mean, to say it all the time, it's like, challenge your assumptions, folks. Find the truth. Because there are some great human beings out there that we don't even know exist because they are conditioned to subscribe to, I'm just a construction worker, I'm just a lawyer,
Yes.
excuse me, I'm just this person. When you indulge in curiosity and you unpack what's there, holy shit, does life show up? Holy shit, do human beings show up? Holy shit, do you learn a lot? And that's what matters. I don't give a shit about your label, your name, your label, your title, your the assets in your bank. Who the hell are you as a human being? Why does it matter?
Yes.
That's what it
Exactly.
is. Like that, you pull on my heartstrings. Like, that's it, folks. If you take anything away, that was it. And thank you. That's all I can say is thank you. I can understand. I mean, I want to pivot to this now because I read this or I came across this, and I totally get it. You've been coined a very influential woman, and I understand that, and I get that. When you hear that, what does that mean to you?
Oh, it surprises me.
Mm.
Um, it's a pleasant surprise, right? But again, it surprises me because I also have my own sort of ideas around what influence looks like and what an influential woman. I mean, and the other women who were listed on that, or who were on that list with me, I mean, some of them are Olympic gold medalists and, sort of have titles coming out of their every pore, like people who have very different fields of excellence that they've pursued. And so for me, it's always like, huh, okay, this is surprising. And thank you. Of course, I'm thankful for the recognition, but it also sort of forces me to remember actually some of what we just talked about, right? That we are more equal than we acknowledge. So just because, for example, this woman who is one of my favorite Olympic athletes is on that list with me, I shouldn't be like, oh, well, I don't belong here because she's on that list. It's like, oh, wow. Yeah, we've excelled in different ways. We've contributed in different ways. We've been recognized in different ways, but we are equals and we both equally belong here. And so I mean, of course, like my ego loves the
Sure, of
recognition and
course.
loves the accolade, but also there's like a quieter lesson there that's just that, you were alluding to, that reminder of our common humanity, and that other people might actually think of me the way I'm thinking of her, but I'm just a normal person, right? In my own mind, I'm just a normal person. I've got, I scream at my kids when they annoy me. I like fight with my husband. I like, sometimes watch really bad TV too late into the night. Like, I'm a normal
Yeah.
person in the exact same way that those other people who I admire are also normal people. And so it's this, yeah, this really nice reminder of like, we're all kind of just people. And so it's great to be recognized. It's great to have these, sort of peers who are, I am still, so in awe of. But we're all just people. And the more I meet like successful, accomplished, thoughtful, interesting people, and at every stage of life and career and whatever, I just sort of, that message just keeps coming back up. Most people are just normal people.
Mm,
And I am also so pleasantly surprised by when I reach out to those who seem ahead of me or more accomplished than me. Not always, but a lot of the time, they are willing to help, to support, to give ideas, to have a chat. And so, if you are listening to this and there is someone you admire or someone who you felt like you were like, and so in awe of, reach out to them. You never know. I think that the mark of a truly confident, successful person is that they also acknowledge that equality and acknowledge that we're all just in this sort of human experience trying to figure it all out together. And so, if the time allows, I will respond and give you help. And if not, cool, no harm done. But there is that sort of real fundamental equality.
thank you. Thank you. You've been an inspiration to me. You're a great role model, a wonderful human being. And I love the way you said it. You're simply a human being. You're like everybody else with your quirks and your idiosyncrasies. And sometimes you don't have your shit figured out either, right? Like
Yeah.
we're fundamentally wired the same way.
Yeah.
That's what, thank you for touching, moving, and inspiring me today. Thanks for being a great role model. Um, just humbled. So thank you. How do
It's been a
people
real pleasure.
how do people get in touch with you? Share the details. Where they connect with
You
you?
got
Because you
it.
know you just said something, and this is inspirational too. Is you never know, folks. Reach out. So how
Yeah.
do they reach out to you? What are the details?
Yeah. So if you're a social person, I'm on Instagram as Rupal Y Patel is my handle. Or you can just reach out to me directly through my website, which is also rupalypatel.com. It's really straightforward.
Beautiful. And there's an abundance of information there, folks. Rupal, an honor, a pleasure to share space. Thank you for doing good things. Thank you for making a difference. And thanks for being an impact to the world. I get that. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.